All right. Well, it's good to see everybody. Welcome to the post-Christmas, pre-New Year's version of the Power Lunch. We have John Anderson with us, who will be playing the role of SAN T. Claus. And I'm here with my black hat playing the role of NAS T. Elf. So that right there was the most valuable part of the whole show today. No, just kidding. Just kidding. And so today we're going to have a little bit of, I don't know if I want to say more informal than usual, because we're usually pretty informal. We're going to have a discussion about NAS, SAN technology, and maybe a little bit of the difference between those things. And, you know, with just a couple people here, I think we can have more of a conversational format. So I do have some stuff to go over, and John and I can talk about, you know, the high levels of the what's and the wherefores. But before we get into that, I'm wondering if, for Pat and Mike, do you guys have any specific questions that we might be able to answer for you, or anything specific that you're wondering about?
No, I don't have anything.
All right. All right.
Just here to check it out.
Here to grab a sandwich and
There you go.
yeah. So yeah, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that if anybody had any specific question, we could talk about it. So I guess, you know, from a high level, John, maybe you want to, you know, talk a little bit about the differences, because a lot of times people confuse a NAS and SAN, or they use the terminology interchangeably. And while they're similar, they're not quite the same. So
Right.
maybe go over at a high level what the difference might be.
Well, as I understand it, NAS is really meant for smaller users, smaller groups. It's less expensive.
You know what? I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to throw that slide up that we can look at.
Nice. Okay.
Then we can kind of talk about a little bit of that. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Right.
Fancy.
Yeah, fancy. See, I got the NAS T Elf on there, huh? And that's very Christmassy, seasonal lettering. I pride myself on my lettering skills.
I think that little guy in the
It's
bottom,
awesome. Good job, Keith.
like a
Thank you.
skinny
Thank
you is awesome.
So yeah, so John, continue on with kind of.
So yeah, it's relatively inexpensive when compared to SAN. It's scalable to a point that what we're limited by is pretty much Ethernet bandwidth on the high side.
Mm-hmm.
So and of course, you know, the way packets are structured, you don't get the same kind of throughput that you do with a SAN, but it is quite a bit easier to maintain, and it's less expensive.
Right.
And it shows up as like a mapped drive or a share, whereas SAN looks like a native drive on the computer, like your operating system hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
So they're different in those aspects. You want to flip to that other slide.
Well, John, initially when you said that the NAS is for smaller businesses, do you mean like 10 people or less? Or when you say that,
Well, it kind of depends on what you're doing with it. If you're just accessing files, just general files, it's going to work fine for you. If you're doing video editing, that's a whole different animal. And it requires a lot more bandwidth and packet prioritization and things that may not work as well with a NAS.
And I would say that if you were in an environment similar to things I've had in my past, which would be call centers, that you need to have the SAN, because if you're running predictive dialers and doing
Large
dips into
databases.
databases and things like that. If you're in an environment that's highly transactional in nature, that where you need a lot of IOPS, a high level of IOPS input, output stuff, that the SAN is probably where you're going to need to live, just because of the throughput and the transactional nature of that environment. And larger enterprises will have that type of a thing going on, even if it's not necessarily a call center, but if it's a data driven organization, they'll have those types of interactions required. Like even doing a lot of like business intelligence work will drive that type of a need. Was this the slide you're thinking about, John?
Yes.
Or was it the
Yeah,
other one?
yeah. I was going to touch on the administration piece, and usually SANs require 2 networks, not just Ethernet. You need Ethernet in a SAN environment to do some of the more mundane or lower level communications, but the actual SAN data is coming over an iSCSI or fiber channel, fiber channel using iSCSI or fiber channel using, something else, fiber channel over Ethernet, FCOE. So most of your big data is going across the fiber channel, and your requests are probably coming across more on Ethernet. Whereas on a NAS, everything is on Ethernet. So it's a lot, there's a lot more traffic on the Ethernet side that's a slower network to start with. I mean, you can see Ethernet ends at 10 gig, fiber channel starts at 16 gigs per second. So it's just a lot faster.
Right. And with a SAN, a lot of times you have what I would think of as a traffic cop in there, right? Deciding where that traffic is allocated between, because you not only have the Ethernet stuff, but when you're talking about the fiber channel, what communications go where, they kind of have that traffic
Right.
cop controller in the middle of that, right? Where with a NAS, it kind of just shows up. It looks like a drive kind of to the outside world with, and you don't have kind of what you alluded to, that specialized administration requirement, right? You don't
Right.
have,
My daughter, I sent her a small NAS that she uses for her photography business. And it's a single drive network attached storage. And for her, it works fine. There's no redundancy, which is a little scary. But, for her purposes, she's only pulling up a picture or 10 pictures at a shot, and that's working fine. And she can administer it. It's simple. So basically it's plug and play. I was able to kind of set it up and ship it to her, and she plugged it into her network, and away she goes. SAN, on the other hand, would require a lot more administration and attention, just a lot more attention, just overall.
right.
Now, if you have you can have multiple disks in either one, and redundancy, and it depends on how you set them up from a RAID standpoint as to what kind of redundancy you're talking about. But both of them can be pretty redundant and pretty great that way. A lot better than just a single drive on your computer or a USB drive.
That being said, we kind of think about, the interesting thing about the NAS is that they're relatively athletic as far as the use case goes. And by that, I mean, you'll see them, like a SAN, most people don't have a SAN sitting in their garage running in their home data center, right?
Not yet.
But not yet, right? Not yet. Depending on how the Internet of Things grows, we might
Mike
have that much
one in his
data. Well,
test bed.
Mr. Mike Smithers has a data center in his garage because he's got a lot of Internet of Things stuff going on. So he probably has a SAN running in his. But when we start thinking about NASs, they're actually pretty athletic, because you'll see it in a business setting, but you'll also see it just like this past week. I was talking to one of my relatives, and they have a need for managing their photographs, their personal photographs, and they went out and they picked up a Buffalo NAS. Now, not my favorite brand necessarily, but you know, you think about those items are in a consumer environment and in a commercial environment. You could see that same thing happen in, you know, that same unit in a small, you know, office place someplace, theoretically. And you can change a configuration of that unit by putting in mechanical drives or SSD drives or whatever, you know, if it's something you can add drives to. I mean, I even think about, you know, one of our frequent guests on the Power Lunch is a great well-known NAS provider, and that is Synology.
Mhm.
Right.
And you know, one of the things that you see with NAS devices, I think that has been a relatively recent and possibly shocking change, is the way a NAS has kind of started to look more like a server.
Right.
They've
Well,
added
Synology
software.
allows you to do a ton of stuff that 5 years ago didn't really exist in the NAS.
Right. And you can think about if you want to go out and spend 50 grand on a SAN and get a certain functionality, but all of a sudden 4,000, you can get that on an NAS. Those types of things, some of the types of things, not necessarily to the same volume, because again, a SANs are going to be chatty and the traffic cop type of thing going on. But you know, when you think about a NAS and the ability to act like a small server within that space, or to serve up simple web pages, or to do backups and those types of things,
Some FTP functionality.
FTP functionality, and they're now building that software right into the device. I mean, literally, I went out and I have it sitting on my desk. It's a Synology 412 disk station, right? And you can get that unit on eBay for $100. You know, you got to put drives in it, but you put multiple terabyte drives in there. I mean, if you want raging speed, you obviously need to use SSDs or something. But to put just, you know, regular mechanical drives in it and have a great backup source, or even in my space, I have a machine that I use for work purposes. Then I have a machine that I use for side hustle. I do video editing with it. But if I'm moving files back and forth, that NAS is extremely handy for being able to do that. Or doing you couple that with the Veeam software, you know, because Veeam has free consumer software. It's incredibly simple. So, you know, I have more compute power just off of 2 old laptops and a used NAS than we used to run our whole business off of back in the 90s. You know, I could put a man on the moon with what I got going on here.
Right.
You know, so I don't know if you have any more thoughts on the availability of those types of units, that they become more accessible. You know, I think that one of the things that we've seen, and I think Synology used to be kind of that vendor. They've improved significantly in the last few years, but they, you know, people, you say you were going to use Synology and people kind of chuckle a little bit. You know, that was the, you know, cheap and deep storage, which it kind of still is, but I think that they've really upped their game. Now, I think there's some technology that you might want to, I don't know if I want to say steer clear of, but you might want to be aware of. Have you seen any of those USB NAS devices that you can create, John?
I'm not sure what you're.
You can get like an open source software, and you can put a bunch of USB sticks in it.
Yeah.
And I think that and people will call that a NAS, but I don't know. Do you have any experience with those things?
I've set up a couple of free NASs.
Why don't you
And
talk about that a little bit?
that it's a bit cumbersome to set up. it's not very user friendly. Synology's kind of really got the handle on the user friendly part in terms of setup. It's very menu driven. Free NAS, the ones that I was setting up, I did one as a customer's backup repository, and then I did one just to play around with it. And they, although they work, they were very fussy, and we ended up moving away from it for a backup repository just because it was just never got to be really stable. It just wasn't. It just didn't meet the requirements.
Right. It's not.
But you know, for a cheap solution, if you're willing to live with a little pain, you know,
If you're willing to
work.
mess around with it.
Right.
Do you notice any difference when you think about the difference between, or when you think about a Windows-based or Microsoft environment versus a Linux environment?
Well, we do a lot of Linux repositories for our cloud all of our cloud repositories for clients are Linux based, because basically they work. They don't reboot with updates. You got to manually update them, but like a Windows machine, it's going to update, it's going to reboot, you're going to lose access to your repository. It's just not as stable in that respect. It still works fine, but you got to expect some downtime, some periodic downtime with the Windows side that we don't see with the Linux side. You know, Windows machines want to be rebooted periodically. The Linux stuff, we've got a few that have been running for well over a year, without having to really touch them. And they're available 24/7. And they're every bit as redundant and happy with life as the Windows machines, maybe more so.
It's interesting to me that Microsoft really hasn't ever gotten beyond that want for machines to be rebooted. That they say that you're not going to have to do that, but largely that just hasn't been the case in my experience anyway.
Well, you know, I at one point I was administering we're a system admin for an NT4 server that had run for over 4 years. That's about the last time I've seen anything that you know, able to run that long.
Right.
Yeah, everything after that, I mean, Windows has just got a big target on its back, and so you need the security updates.
Right. Yeah, that part is true. Yeah, so I don't know if we want to talk about, just kind of go over at a high level, you know, with the NAS, you know, a NAS solution can be soup to nuts, right? I mean, it can be very inexpensive, surprisingly inexpensive on the consumer grade end of things. And then you can go up from there, but very attainable depending on what you need. You know, I think you can tailor it to what your environment is. And, you know, it's kind of a, like the bullet point is a self-contained solution. So using the past week as an example, and my relative, they literally went to Best Buy, and not to plug any one place, but a retailer that starts with BB, I mean. They went to that place and they got themselves, you know, arguably a business class or something, could be used for business class work, more than some of our customers when we first interact with them, more than some of those guys have, you know, and set it up and are off to the races with using that environment. And again, so this person is not the most technical. Let's say this person in my family is not the most astute technically, and they were able to get it out of the box, get it set up, attach it to everything, and use it. So there is that ease of administration piece that, you know, with a SAN you just don't have that. I mean, a SAN there's some specialized knowledge required, even beyond just being a technical IT person, right? I mean, there's the running a SAN is almost a discipline in and of itself.
Right. We have guys that specialize in that at NetVPro. So,
So
yeah,
I have a
very-
quick question, Keith. In
Yep.
your particular example that you just gave, what were they experiencing at home that they felt like they needed to go to the BB store and bring that home and set that up? I mean, what was the driver behind doing that task?
Well, the biggest thing is they had, I can't remember if the number was 17,000 pictures. They had a bunch of family photographs. Like they only take digital photographs. And they had it on a hard drive of a computer, but they're afraid that they were going to lose that. And, grandkids, kids, just, like, it's a different world for photographs than it used to be. You used to print them off, put them in an album, and then you had them. The risk was then you had fire, you might lose them. And they didn't feel like they understood products like Dropbox and OneDrive enough to use it. So they went and they got this Buffalo NAS, which has cloud storage on it, but it's all part of the package. So they don't need to really know how to do much of it other than click the button that says cloud storage, and then click the other button that's add more. Put in your credit card number and you're off to the races. But well, that was the thing for them, is they were afraid they'd lose these photographs that, are a big part of their life. I think the other thing, and kind of going to one of these other bullet points, is where it says 24/7 and remote data availability. Part of that was they have it set up so they could access those pictures from anywhere. If they just have it on the hard drive of their machine, yeah, they probably could have set it up, but this made
Yeah,
it super easy.
I can see how this goes. They come over to your house, Keith. Here,
Right.
pull it up on my phone. I got 47,000 pictures for you to look at during dinner.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So not only can we not stream Netflix, but whatever. So that was another part about. I think the other thing in this kind of is an interesting point, though, where it says wide array of systems and sizes. It really is soup to nuts on those NAS devices. When you think about a Synology alone, I mean, was it you can get a 2-disc unit for a couple $100, right?
Yeah.
Or you can get the what's one of them we have is a 16 bay disc station. And think about that. You have a 16 bay disk station and you put 10 terabyte drives in it. All of a sudden you're talking some heavy duty storage. I mean, slow as a turtle, but if you need just a bunch of stuff, that's something that can work.
Right.
So
Well, and you can set up multiple RAID arrays in those too. I mean, it leaves you open with all sorts of options that just didn't exist a few years ago.
which is actually kind of a good segue into the next one. When you start thinking about RAID and the ability to be fault or failure tolerant, if you have, let's see, I have one of these. If you just go out to Best Buy, right, and you just want to do backups, I have one right here. And you just go out and you get a Toshiba, you just get a little disk drive, right? 2 terabyte disk drive. Well, if this thing dies, then it's dead, right? But
Right.
if you have, like Synology with multiple disks set up in a RAID configuration, now you're tolerant to a disk failure, right? You can absorb that and swap out a disk and be good to go. Now, that's different than that other thing. So to those of us who are in IT, obviously we're like, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But if someone like my aunt and uncle who aren't familiar to that or aren't familiar with that, that's kind of an interesting concept for them. And I think the other thing, and I'll default back to Synology because they kind of blew everyone away with the stuff they had going on, was automatic backups to other devices. Synology does a great job with their replication. I happen to know that somebody on this call is using their replication capabilities. We won't name names, but they may or may not make pizzas. That shall remain anonymous, but having two Synologies and being able to back up between them, or not back up, I guess, replicate between them, is a very powerful thing. And then even the concept of, and they all have it now. The Buffalo folks have it. I don't know what they call theirs, but Synology has that C2 product, which is backing up to the cloud. So if you go out and you purchase a Synology, now all of a sudden you can back it up to the cloud. So if your underwear drawer catches on fire and your tapes get destroyed, you're out of luck. But if you have a Synology there, you're replicating to a cloud thing and you can still get your stuff. So, and they offer that as either, they have a capacity that you get with the purchase. If you need more storage, you could buy it. But again, that's a whole different level than if you just have this static disk, and that's your playground. You are limiting yourself. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the SAN piece, if I can get it to go to that. Benefits of a SAN. I think that, as we talked about, extremely fast data. And where does that matter? That matters in places where you're doing big queries. You have big databases with a lot of transactional stuff going on. It matters in a call center where you're popping, they call them screen pops. Somebody's phone, the call comes in, you recognize the number, you do a database dip, pull out the information, and this thing is happening in real time. Or you're doing predictive dialing, and there's a constant chattiness happening between a gateway and the data. So a SAN is very good for that type of an environment. And like if you were to have a NAS implemented and you were doing that type of work, you're going to flood that local network, right? You're gonna fill up your capacity. Kind of like if you were to go out in the front yard and you're a little kid, you go out and you drink out of the garden hose, right? Well, imagine if you went out and you turned on a fire hose. You'd have water coming out of your nose for 3 days. But that's what those transactional things are like to a local network. They really will limit your capabilities. So the SAN will take that chattiness and put it on its own private network, if you will, off of the production space. The scalability of a SAN, think about Legos. As you need more capacity, you add more Lego pieces with same to similar speed. You don't lose the speed just because you add another node onto that SAN. Now there's usually limits. I think it kind of talks about the limits of interconnect, but as long as you're within those limits, you can usually expand quite a bit without losing any speed capabilities. OS level native access to files.
Right. That's talking about the differences between accessing something as a shared drive or a drive share on the network versus having it appear as a local drive in your operating system, which works. Some programs won't work with a share as well or at all. So having it like native access to those files is a big deal. And allows things to work faster and more reliably.
Yep. And then when we think about the only solution for demanding applications, like a call center application, for example, has a lot of concurrent access. I mean, when I think about when I was at Fingerhut, we had 10,000 to 12,000 agents, call center people, accessing data at any given time. And just having that ability to deliver that volume of data concurrently, it required something like a SAN. A NAS would have been brought to its knees to handle that. And when you think about a SAN handling that information for a call center, but also handling that information for well, inbound call center putting orders in, outbound call center making calls out, and a distribution center fulfilling orders. All that transactional information coming from, one storage solution, if you will. And that's when you start thinking about big ones like EMC and those. So really quite amazing when you start to think about it. So Mike and Pat, do you guys have any questions at all, or is there anything that popped up that was of interest to you? Or
No questions over on my end. That was
I'm good,
informative.
all right, very good. Well, I don't know, John, do you have anything else you'd like to add? That's kind of the end of my slides and my information.
I think we covered it pretty well.
I don't know, Piper, do you think, are we doing the wheel of fun and enjoyment, or should we consider that Mike and Pat are great friends of NetVPro and perhaps just give each one of them a sandwich?
Well, it is our Christmas special, and what are we if we are
Christmas
not
special.
giving on the holidays?
That's a very good point,
I do
Piper.
have the wheel spin chalked up if we'd like to, but
Let's do the wheel of fun and enjoyment, and this is going to be
just
for
for the enjoyment.
this is going to be for who's the cool person of the day. But let's give both Pat and Mike. Let's give both
Okay.
Pat and Mike a sandwich. But
We'll
one
give
of
you a
them,
wheel spin just so you feel extra special.
we'll let them. They can pick their sandwich, but the one who loses it'll have to be a tuna fish sandwich.
Oh boy. I'm gonna give mine to my wife anyway, so.
All right, let's do. Oh, I suppose I have to stop my share,
Yes.
and I suppose I need to grant you goddess level control. All right, there you go.
I want to just say to Jon and Keith, thank you very much. I mean, that was really informative. I mean,
Well,
and
thank
knowing the
you.
differences between those two, because
I-
honestly, I wanted to open with the fact that I looked them both up on the Google, and they pretty much define themselves as just about the same thing.
Did you use Google or did you Bing it on Google? Or did you Google it on Bing? It's hard to tell which one.
I probably Googled it on Google.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's hard to tell
Right
sometimes.
away, he's gonna be difficult.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing. That's why I'm nasty elf, because I'm difficult.
Right.
So that's why I got the black hat on. All right, Pipes, we're good to go. If
All
you
right,
want
I'm
to
ready.
then
Yes.
half and half, see who the cool guy is for the day and who's the goat.
But just for the record, you're both very cool.
Yeah, you're both cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yes,
Yeah,
My two-sided giant wheel.
yes.
yeah, I think we took a shot at this.
Maybe they're spinning for a sandwich and a NetVPro
Oh, it'll
coffee
land
cup.
right on the line. Oh, it's right.
There's Mike. Yeah. Oh, look.
That's what I won.
Confetti. Confetti. You've won an orange peeler and
Congratulations.
maybe a coffee cup and an old sock.
Well, thank you.
All right. Very good. Well, I hope you guys have a safe holiday and stay warm,
Happy
for
New
goodness
Year.
sakes. Get your long
Yeah.
johns on.
What are you gonna do when it gets cold out?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like I told Sheila, it's 24 degrees like it is over there. I start taking my shirt off, so I hardly stand it. It's so warm.
Well,
All right, very good. Well, thanks everybody.
All right.
Take
great
care.
to
Have a
see
good
you guys.
holiday.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, guys.
And great job again, Keith and Jon. Great job.